Revelation 1877. From the 5th of April 1941. Right of self-determination. Self-determination. The law of self-determination is of utmost importance for the beingness, for it was thereby granted a certain freedom, which only makes a becoming perfect possible. As long as the being is under the influence of God's adversary, it is completely dependent on him, both in its attitude and in its activity. The attitude will always be directed against God, just as the activity will always contradict divine will. However, the being could not be held responsible despite its attitude directed against God as long as it was forcibly at the mercy of the evil power. Only the freedom of the will justifies a subsequent responsibility. And thus God took the power over the beingness from the adversary and thus placed it freely into the spiritual world and left it free to decide for or against him. It should not feel compulsion from any side, but God wanted the beingness to long for him again of its own accord, and therefore gives it utmost freedom on earth and also knowledge about the meaning and purpose of earthly life, advantage and disadvantage of a wrong attitude. He holds the joys of the hereafter on the one hand as well as the agonizing state of remorse on the other hand in front of him, and thereby he wants to make the decision easy for the beingness itself, but the being must make it itself. As soon as God took away the adversary's power over the beings created by his will, he also loosened his power over these entities. He placed the entities in the position of being able to decide freely, but the latter was left up to them. And thus it is divine will that nothing in the universe should be in the spirit's bondage. Although the stage of free will in the human being is controlled by God, this has nothing to do with his self-determination. The soul, the essence in the human being, remains completely free and can now decide for the earthly, for matter, which is part of evil because it contains the unredeemed spiritual within itself, or also for the spiritual within itself which, after the free decision, enters into union with the light-filled spirit, which was from eternity. All coercion of the soul is excluded, and consequently one can also speak of self-redemption, since precisely this will, the free decision, entails either redemption or being bound. And thus every being has to bear the responsibility for its life in eternity itself, since it can turn to God in complete freedom, to the source of its strength, or also to God's adversary, who allowed his God-opposing will to become active during the creation of those entities. Amen.